Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We're Baltimore positive, and we're positively doing some football tonight. Luke Jones joining us now. Yeah, strange Thursday night football, strange election week, strange Sunday game. All of that being said, bright lights are up, and for those who have Amazon Prime and other places, watching Joe Burrow come after this defense tonight. Short rest. I never know what to make of these division games. I will say this: they prepare for Lamar. They should be a little better at it than other teams.
They should. They should, and I emphasize the word should, but they're also playing on a short week. They're the team going on the road. I know I saw one of the Cincinnati reporters, I even linked to it in my 12 thoughts, looking at the recent history of AFC North matchups and going on the road and playing a primetime game, and especially on a short week. That generally doesn't go well for the road team. So you have that in mind as well. But look, I mean, we saw these teams duke it out in week five. It was a shootout. It was an overtime thriller. It was a game that guys like Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton this week basically acknowledged, saying that they kind of felt like they lost with the way the defense played in that game. They didn't feel overly celebratory. They were happy to get the win. And certainly Cincinnati did some things at the end to self-destruct there, as the Ravens did. But this is a huge opportunity for the Baltimore Ravens to not just continue to roll, obviously getting back on track against Denver last week, knowing they have the Steelers in Pittsburgh next week. But this is a Bengals team that's kind of holding on right now. They're still firmly within the wild card race, but they want to stay that way, and they want to have some semblance of a shot left at the division. And it's difficult envisioning them doing that without a win tonight. So this is an opportunity for the Ravens to, I don't know if bury the Bengals would be the right word to say, but you can put them in a dark place 10 games into the season where they're looking at it and saying, wow, we have no margin for error the rest of the way. So, but we need to see a defense that shows some growth and improvement from what they did against Joe Burrow and the Bengals back in week five. And you want your top ranked offense, your MVP quarterback, to go out and handle their business against a team that hasn't been very good defensively overall. So it's an AFC North game, to your point. Short week, you never know exactly what to expect, but I think this one, I'm expecting this one to be a good one tonight. That's for sure.
Well, the resident controversy obviously had to do with the trades this week, pass rush, not getting a pass rusher, what the cost of all of that is. You and I went back and forth. Now that it's over with, help in the secondary. I will accept that. Certainly help on the wide receiver game. They're basically like free trades, though, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they didn't give a whole lot, and they got a couple of fringe football players.
Yeah, well, I think Deontay Johnson's more than fringe. Now, Tre'Davious White at this point in time, considering he had an ACL in Achilles last year, he was benched after 4 games with the Rams this year. He had been a healthy scratch these last few weeks. I think that's a little more fringe. That's a little more, and I agree, low risk. Both these moves, I mean, they essentially gave up nothing. I mean, when you're talking about, especially in the Tre'Davious White deal, you're talking about future, out in the futures, a swap of seventh round picks. I mean, they were going to cut. That tells me they were going to cut him if the Ravens didn't do that. I mean, that's what that was shaping up to be. So, we'll see if he can give them some depth in the secondary. I think the jury's out on how much he has left. Maybe there's a thought that he gets another month or so removed from last year's early season Achilles injury. Maybe he can be a factor for this defense in December and January, or maybe he's just an insurance policy. Deontay Johnson, I think I'm intrigued, especially tonight with Isaiah Likely out. Maybe you see a few more three wide receiver sets. Maybe we see Deontay Johnson more involved. I certainly have more optimism for him contributing than I do Tre'Davious White at this point. But again, to your point, you give up next to nothing. When you look at the collection of pass rushers, which is what we were really talking about as far as trade deadline movement goes, Za'Darius Smith was the one that I felt could have moved the needle. I know Preston Smith goes to the, I 5 years ago, I like Preston Smith. I'm not sure what he has left at this point in time. I'm not sure about some of the other fringe guys that move. So the reality was there weren't a ton of big splash moves. I guess Lattimore going to Washington, which the Ravens were sniffing around there. But let's face it, we can talk. We did this with the Orioles for 2 months leading up to the trade deadline, and you try to envision these scenarios where you can bring in that player that's going to be the quote missing link, right? The final piece, the final guy you need to get you over the hump. When we know in reality that's pretty rare, and normally it's much more a case of the guys you already have needing to rise to the occasion, your stars playing like stars, and improvement from within. I mean, this defense, we've said it, this past defense doesn't need to be elite. It doesn't need to be great for this team to go to a Super Bowl, but it does need to be better. It does need to be more consistent. At least get to that. Can we get to that middle of the pack range when we're talking about the Ravens' pass defense? And in that vein, tonight should be a good test. Looking at how they fare against Joe Burrow and the Bengals the second time around, knowing that T. Higgins is doubtful to play in this game and how big he is for their offense. If they give up 38 points again, then that's not inspiring much confidence that they've made any progress with their pass defense. So, can you get some stops? Can you make Joe Burrow and the Bengals have to drive the length of the field? Don't give up as many big plays. It's, and this lends itself well with the Dean Pease and his presence on that coaching staff. For years, we talked about what under him with his defenses bend but don't break. This team can bend. They just can't break quite as frequently defensively as we've seen. So we'll see. I think this is a good litmus test in that regard because Joe Burrow is playing great football. Lamar Jackson's MVP of the league in the first half, but Joe Burrow is one of those two or three other quarterbacks that is right behind him in terms of guys that are playing at a high level. So let's see what this defense can do the second time around against the Cincinnati Bengals. But yeah, I think the to sum up the trade deadline, it's very difficult to be upset with the two moves they made in terms of what they gave up. But I think it is very fair to wonder just how much better they really got. Did they really move the needle very much, other than just adding? Like I said, in Deontay Johnson's case, I do have more optimism, but a good, really good depth piece, if nothing else. In the case of Tre'Davious White, the jury's out on whether he has anything left at this point, if I'm being perfectly honest with you.
We mentioned injuries a couple weeks ago and how fortunate they had been when things were going right. And I remember doing Cleveland radio 2 weeks ago before the Cleveland game, and you had, for the first time, seen a few names on the injury report. Obviously, that game did not go the direction that anybody around here wanted it to go, but getting guys more healthy, you mentioned likely out. We had talked about injuries to Marlon Humphrey a couple weeks ago. We talked about the secondary in general being a little bit banged up. Then we talked about the D line, Travis Jones and Brent Urban and other guys going down, Michael Pierce. Thoughts on health as far as where they are now, and then this Pittsburgh game coming up in 10 days.
Well, I think from a health standpoint, it's still positive from the standpoint that they haven't suffered like these season-ending injuries, right? Marlon Humphrey's no longer on the injury report. Travis Jones didn't have a game status designation, so hopefully that means that he is ready to be looking like Travis Jones again. Because I think as much as we've talked about the pass rush, if you look at the pass rush recently and how it's kind of gone away these last few weeks, I think that very much coincides with Travis Jones being so limited, right? I mean, he did not play a defensive snap against Denver. That was by design. He was an insurance policy, nothing more than that. In the case of someone else going down, and then he would have played a little bit in the rotation. But you look at him getting hurt at some point during that Tampa game, and you saw their pass rush disappear. Really, the last few weeks, I mean, they've had when it shows up and they get a sack, great, but it's really feast or famine, right? They get the sacks and their ranking in that department is pretty good actually. But you look at the pressure rate across different metrics and different resources that are kind of keeping track of that. We know it hasn't been good enough. So, but I think Travis Jones being back and hopefully being closer to 100% with that ankle, get through tonight's game, then you have the mini bye on the back end of that, knowing to your point as they get ready for Pittsburgh. But in Likely's case, hamstring. I saw him walking around the locker room on Tuesday. I don't think this is I don't think it's a multi-week kind of thing. I think this is something that maybe he would have had a shot to play if it was a Sunday game, but you got to be careful with hamstrings. And they do have Mark Andrews and Charlie Kohler there. So it's not like they're completely bare at the tight end position. Brent Urban's still dealing with the concussion, missing a second game. Not shocking when the second game is a short week. So, we'll see about him as we get closer to Pittsburgh on the other end of this game. But hey, Keaton Mitchell, he's questionable for tonight's game. He has been practicing fully. I'm not certain that they're going to activate him for the Bengals game, but his 21-day window is up next week. He'll be on the 53-man roster, and I know at the very least you're going to see him when he is activated worked into that kick return conversation and worked into probably starting out on a light workload in the backfield. I mean, you have Derrick Henry, so it's not as though you need to give Keaton Mitchell a ton of touches. I mean, Justice Hill doesn't get many touches, and he's done a good job, but he's on the verge of coming back. So, health wise, yeah, it's very difficult to complain. I get it. Michael Pierce is on IR. John Harbaugh has already said that's not a season-ending injury. They certainly miss him. That's why I thought you could have seen the Ravens perhaps make a move for an interior defensive lineman. I know Calais Campbell's name was thrown out there by a number of teams looking for help in that department, but he ultimately didn't move. But I think overall you still can't be too upset with where this team is health-wise. When you're looking on at IR and look at some of the teams around the league, I mean, look at Kansas City. Look what they've lost at the wide receiver position. And yeah, they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, but they miss Rashee Rice. They miss the idea of what Hollywood Brown was supposed to be for them. So, the Ravens to this point, and that's where everyone crosses their fingers, knocks on wood, says a little prayer. They've been pretty darn healthy overall. You're going to have injuries where guys miss a game or two. I mean, that's inevitable. What you want to try to avoid as much as possible are key players going down with season-ending injuries, and that's where the Ravens to this point in the season have been quite fortunate. So, yeah, banged up a little bit this week, and yeah, you miss Isaiah Likely, who caught 2 touchdowns against the Bengals back in Week 5. But Lamar, even though he's dealing with the knees, not doesn't have a game status. We'll see if he runs any more tonight than he did against Denver last week, where he barely ran at all. And missing Brent Urban still, but overall, you look at that Bengals injury report: T. Higgins doubtful, Orlando Brown questionable, B.J. Hill, who's probably their best defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman, he's questionable with a rib injury. So I'd say the Ravens had the advantage from an injury standpoint going into tonight's game, and you just hope that you can avoid anything major in the process of playing tonight's game because of what you said. Yeah, you do get some extra rest, but knowing how big that Pittsburgh game in 10 days is going to loom.
Yeah, I feel better about the Ravens game than I would just in a general sense without Higgins. I mean, I think you start taking major weapons away from Joe Burrow. That's how you get the 31, 35, 38. That's how the gunslinger thing happens. I have no doubt that the Ravens will have no problem moving the football. Lamar and the knee and him not running and it being a different kind of threat, a different kind of game, specifically against Cincinnati that has prepared well for him and has tried to prepare over the course of years. Lots of players that have seen it before. Lamar in the leg and Harbaugh and answering questions and him not being as mobile. It was a little concerning to me. I think I said to you, after Sunday, he didn't look as fast, didn't look as sharp. And in the middle of the season, you don't want to see that because at the end of the day, he still is their best weapon that way.
Yeah, I mean, well, he certainly looked sharp throwing the ball, but you're right. I mean, you didn't see him run around as much. Although the times where he needed to extend plays and create a little more time and roll out, he didn't look like a 39-year-old Joe Flacco either, right? He didn't look like a 45-year-old Tom Brady
Hey,
either. So,
dude, I love if he's running out of the pocket and actually protecting himself and thinking like that, thinking a little bit more cautiously. I'm okay with that this time of year. I really am.
well, I I I, I agree with you, especially if he's not 100%. Obviously, you want him to be 100%. You want him to be able to roll and move the way he does. But keep in mind, I mean, go back and look at the box score for that Cincinnati game back in Week 5. The first meeting between these teams, it was very much a case of uh, Lamar Jackson kind of doing the heavy lifting from a running standpoint. I mean, Derrick Henry was a non-factor until he broke off the long run in overtime. Now, part of that was also game flow because the Ravens were behind that entire game, or certainly the entire second half. But Lamar was a big part of what they did. And I think that's where this will be interesting. And look, I don't expect Lamar to run 15 times. I never expect that anymore. That does happen on occasion, but they have so many other weapons. But he sat out. The only real practice they had this week was Tuesday, and he sat that out. So, I think it was still much more in the rest department than major concern or anything like that. I think that's stating the obvious, but uh, you do have a Bengals team that has Trey Hendrickson, who's coming off of a monster game against Vegas. I mean, they still have Sam Hubbard. They blitzed Lamar more than they've used the blitz against any quarterback this year. Now, it wasn't overly successful when you consider what he did and the numbers he put up in that game, but it will be interesting to see how Lou Anarumo and that defense proceeds, knowing that Lamar might not be 100% with the knee and might be a little more inclined to play from the pocket than he normally is. So, but that said, I mean, this team still has so many weapons. This is a Bengals defense that, let's face it, has maybe over the last month played better, Philadelphia game aside, but this is still not a very good defense that they're going up against. And I mean, we've talked about it. Who's really been able to stop this Ravens offense? Even on a week when Lamar isn't 100%, look what he did against the Denver Broncos, who were supposedly an elite defense. So that's where I look at this and still say, when it comes down to it, division game, two great quarterbacks, two offenses that are more than capable of scoring a lot of points. I still look at the matchups. I understand the Ravens defense has been better at home than it's been on the road. Their past defense has at least been closer to average playing at home than being bottom of the league the way it's been on the road. So all of that in mind, I still look at this and say, I have a really tough time envisioning Cincinnati getting enough stops in this game. Even if Joe Burrow plays at a high level, even if Jamar Chase puts up big numbers, the fact that T. Higgins is missing really puts Cincinnati at a disadvantage there because I just think it gives Joe Burrow a much smaller margin for error. And look, he's played great football, so maybe that won't matter. Look how many points they scored last week without T. Higgins on the field. But at the same time, I still come back to, can the Bengals get enough stops against this Ravens offense the way it's been playing? And that's, throw Deontay Johnson into the mix as well as a wild card at the very least, knowing that he can take the top off of defense and be a deep threat. So, that's where I still look at this. And yeah, I'm intrigued to see what the game plan is in terms of Lamar and his legs and whether it's a repeat of Denver or maybe he catches them by surprise and he is scrambling and running around way more like he did back in week 5. But I think that's certainly a big question. But that said, I still, I still have so much confidence in how this Ravens offense is playing right now because who's been able to stop them? Even Cleveland, who we said did a good job, they still scored 24 points in that game. So I think it's going to be a tall order for this Bengals defense to really slow down Lamar and this offense enough to pull it out tonight.
I think it's hard for local fans to understand the Cincinnati thing from where that franchise was for so long to where it went with these white uniforms and Joe Burrow and sellout games. I mean, when we played out there 5 weeks ago, it was a $250 ticket to get in Cincinnati. I remember when there were always empty seats there and all that. The expectation and the bar has changed there for what Joe Burrow is, and I think even expectations of what he's capable of. But every time I hear national pundits talk about him, they just talk about it being a one-man team. The way Peyton Manning was perceived, maybe with Edgerrin James for 5 minutes and Marvin Harrison is, yeah, they got a couple of skill position players. They don't have much else, and they've been ravaged by the fact that salary cap and they were in a Super Bowl and teams came and they had a better defense then and they've spent money on the Orlando Browns and different things trying to shore up the offensive line. But you talk about coming close and not capturing it. It certainly feels that way with the Burrow Chase Higgins thing, at least in the here and now. They were good enough to win a championship in recent years. Right now, I don't know. They have a quarterback that's good enough, but I don't know that the operation is good enough there. And a Raven victory on a short week on the road for them sort of puts an end to them, right? Like they lose tonight, it's they're in an ugly, ugly position, not just in the division, but in the real race of things. And they were one of, Buffalo, a handful of teams here, Kansas City, that we thought they're a real they have potential of being a really good team. I don't think we even believe that about Pittsburgh next week, that they're a better team than Cincinnati, or the perception would be that they'd be a better team. They've had a better defense, that's for sure. Pittsburgh has. But Cincinnati, a loss here in a season kind of that hits the rocks in the middle of Joe Burrow's career. You wouldn't want Lamar Jackson to wake up and be 3-6 or 3-7. You know what I mean? Like at any point during his administration, this is about to happen to Burrow if they lose tonight.
Yeah, I mean 4-6. It's not impossible, but boy, you've got next to no margin for error the rest of the year, right? And I know they don't. You look at their schedule; it's not impossible. It's not this murderer's row gauntlet that they have to go through. But at the same time, if you're good, you need to win games, right? I mean, that sounds so simplistic, but it's like you can keep looking at a team from an eyeball test standpoint and say, oh, well, they have so much talent. Well, if it doesn't show up on the scoreboard when the clock hits zeros at the end of the fourth quarter, then what's it worth? I mean, Joe Burrow's been great this year. Like I said, I mean, you look, Lamar's been MVP of the first half of the season, and Joe Burrow's right there in that tier with Josh Allen, Jared Goff, right? I mean, he's been that great. And look, he has two great wide receivers. Jamar Chase is one of the very best in football. T. Higgins is, when he's healthy, which is a big if, and a big reason why Cincinnati, even though we know the Bengals are cheap, aren't going to pay him, because these types of things tend to happen with T. Higgins. But when he's right, he's a top 15 or top 10 wide receiver. I mean, he's that good. So he's had great wide receivers, but they've had issues on their offensive line. It's why they didn't win the Super Bowl a few years ago. I mean, if they had a better offensive line, they almost, I mean, they were a few minutes away, right? I mean, that game came down to the wire against the Rams, but they have not had much of a running game. I do think Chase Brown is becoming more of a factor. I think they're understanding how to use him a little more. I do think he is someone to watch as an X factor out of the backfield as a receiver tonight. But Burrow's done this largely with their running game being a non-factor. I mean, they're not a running game that scares you. I mean, you got to be on, they'll try to keep you honest, but their formula for winning is Joe Burrow dropping back and throwing 40 times, right? And being extremely efficient and taking shots and moving the chains and making big plays when it's afforded to them. And defensively, a couple of years ago, as much as I would have liked that defense a couple of years ago, that defense is really lacking talent. I mean, Trey Hendrickson's great. I like BJ Hill if he's healthy and available tonight. But Sam Hubbard has not what he was a couple years ago, at least when you look at some of the sites that evaluate that. Their back end is not good enough, right? I mean, you, you talk about some of the guys that walked out the door. I mean, Jesse Bates at safety, one of the very best safeties in football, and they had him for years, and they didn't get it done with him. And they should have, because they really miss him. And safety has been a black hole for them the last couple years since he's departed. So look, you always have a chance when you have a great quarterback. We've talked about that for years now. Times as long as Lamar is healthy and upright, the Ravens have a chance against anybody, even in times where they've been decimated with injuries elsewhere on the field. When Lamar, number 8's healthy, you've got a shot. So the Bengals always have that going for them if Burrow is healthy. And like Lamar, he's had his own injury issues over the course of his career. But it's really tough to win that way consistently. And to your point, if you drop this game tonight and you're 4-6, division is over at that point. By any practical, I mean, you kind of look at analytics sites right now. I think DVOA has them at 3% chance to win the AFC North going into tonight's game. That certainly plummets if they lose. And again, you just look at it, 4-6. All right, even if you want to be optimistic and say 9-8 still has a puncher's chance to be the last wild card, because we've seen that. I mean, think about the work you have to do. You have to play better football the rest of the way than you have at any point this year just to get to 9-8. And that's including winning games on the road and division games and
But having
all
their
that stuff.
season in peril first week in November that wasn't in the budget for the Bengals. That wasn't what they thought was going to be.
Agreed, but at the same time, look at how they've operated in recent years. I mean, they get off to their identity has been they get off to a lousy start. I mean, that's happened to them multiple times. So at some point in time, and that's
Well,
where,
Burrow's always
you
coming
know,
back from an injury too.
well, that's a factor, but that's where I also, you know me, you've heard this. I'm not a big Zach Taylor guy. I think Joe Burrow is fantastic. I think Jamar Chase is fantastic. I think they have other really good players at certain spots in the field. I think more often than not, Zach Taylor lets them down in terms of strategy and things of that nature. I don't think he's the worst coach in the league. Let me be clear about that. But I end of the game against the Ravens back in week 5 was a perfect example of the kind of things I have problems with watching Zach Taylor. But for whatever reason, and Burrow's health might be a very big part of that, to your point. But they get off to these bad starts and then they can't overcome it. I mean, that was the big narrative for them last year. Same time of year, right? I mean, they came into Baltimore on a Thursday night. They needed to win. Burrow hurts his wrist and their season's over. Now, if he stays healthy, maybe they rally and play better in the second half of the season and they make the playoffs because they actually did okay with their backup quarterback still. But I just, it's very tough. And we talked about this a lot when the Ravens fell to 0-2. I mean, think how perilous that felt. And, meanwhile, you have the Bengals who were 1-4, right? I mean, they were 1-4 after they lost that Ravens game. I mean, that's extremely difficult to recover from that. So, look, they go out there and they handle their business and they hand the Ravens a loss on their home field tonight, then we're having a different conversation because the Bengals are back to 500. They're only a game behind the Ravens in the standings. They're what a game and a half behind the Steelers, I guess, with Pittsburgh their Sunday matchup pending. This has the potential to turn their season around and really put themselves in a position where you would at least say they've got a shot, certainly for the playoffs and even for the division at that point. But you lose this game, you just get to a point where you just say, okay, what it looks like on paper, what my priors were going into the season, they're 4-6, right? I mean, at some point in time, you can keep talking about talent, but got 6 losses and you're not even to Thanksgiving. You're a couple weeks out from Thanksgiving. So this is a huge game for them. But on the flip side, if you're the Ravens, and this is where, I don't want to pick on the Ravens about it, but we've talked about this a lot about the Ravens at times looking like the best team in the NFL. Well, they're 6-3. If you lose this game, you're 6-4, right? I mean, you could talk all you want about your overall talent and how incredible Lamar Jackson has been, and he has been, but your deficiencies getting in your way then, and your deficiencies making you stub your toe too often and costing you a chance at the number 1 seed or maybe the number 2 seed or forget about that, the division, with Pittsburgh right now, even though Pittsburgh certainly has, you look at the back half of their schedule, get back to me as far as their chances on ultimately winning the division. But if you're the Ravens, you got to win these games. You can't keep dropping games and saying, well, we should have won that one. That only flies so long until you just say that's part of your identity. So this is obviously a big game, rematch of the first one. These teams played a great football game back in week 5. I don't think it's going to be quite as high a scoring as it was back in week 5, just because of the short week and because these teams have seen each other again. I think both sides are going to make some adjustments in that way. But that said, you consider how prolific both of these passing games and both of these red zone offenses have been. It's difficult to envision this being a 16-13 game. I think we're going to see points, and I think it's going to come down to which defense is able to get a stop or two at a critical time over the course of a 60-minute game.
Luke Jones is here. He'll be monitoring the game this evening. We'll be monitoring the game. We'll be back after it on Friday morning around here talking about potentially a Raven victory and potentially burying the Bengals, and certainly 10 days off for the Ravens before the Pittsburgh game. All right, last thing, sense of humor. You're the fashion tweet guy. A little history lesson here. Back when the disputed Ravens flying B happened in 96, 97, 98 and was disputed. They had to have a different logo. They threw it out to the fans. The week that it was voted on in the Baltimore Sun poll, I was on vacation that week. I was a huge proponent of the kiss face. I made no stink about it on the air. I was the biggest sports radio guy on the air at that point. It was 1999, 2000. I made no pitch for it. I just thought there's no way the Kiss Bird's going to lose. Like, there's no way they're going with this angled B that looks like a sickle that's backwards on the other side of the helmet because of the way the B and the thing works on the helmet. And I remember saying to David Modell that he called it the Kiss Face. I called it the Kiss Face, the Kiss Face logo. That logo hasn't been seen by most fans, NFL fans. Ravens fans have seen it. It's a primary, secondary logo amongst us, amongst Baltimore people. But I would think there are Packers fans or Rams fans who put the game on and say, what's that thing? Because they haven't seen it a whole lot. I think maybe ESPN had used it at various points as a secondary logo on, when they put the Ravens up or whatever, but it was never the primary logo in any way. And the purple helmet, I remember saying to David Modell, and this goes back to Super Bowl 35, and he and I remember having, I didn't love the white uniforms that we won Super Bowl 35 in because they didn't have enough purple in them. I said to him, they're so white. They're white on white and they're black helmets. And you can't even see the purple. There's just a little bit of purple in the piping, a little bit of purple in the helmet. If you go back and watch Super Bowl 35, we don't look very purple. We look more black and white. I thought the purple helmet would be a thing, and I thought the Packers wear that. And I think David said, what do you think we're in the WFL? What do you think we're in Northwestern? We're not wearing purple helmets. We're wearing black as he's chewing on a cigar. Um, but I was always disappointed that the B, the second B, not the flying B, the modern B, whatever you would call that, the modern logo. I always thought that it was the second best choice. So 26 years later, I'm getting to honor David Modell. By the way, I didn't hate the mustard pants. I say that a lot. I know you're frowning already. All of you are frowning at the mustard pants. Um,
Awful.
I don't love the
Awful.
purple pants, but nonetheless, we're gonna get a look tonight. We're gonna get a color rush look, and no one is more famous for fashion tweets than my partner Luke Jones.
I've always liked the logo, the Gene Simmons Kiss logo. And to your point, it's been known to Ravens fans because it's been a secondary logo from the beginning. I think back in like 99, they updated it a little bit just with like some shading and coloring compared to what it was in 96. But the it does look a little awkward on the side of a helmet because it's a front facing logo. It's not a profile logo. So that's where it's a little, I don't want to say weird because that's not the right term, but it doesn't look like a natural helmet logo, I guess, for lack of a better description. But for an alternate helmet, I think the players are excited about it. The fans are excited about it. The purple helmet and it's a gold face mask. So it's chic. It looks, it's different. I will say this. I think watching it from afar, and I think from the TV angle, the primary TV angle, sideline angle, I'm not sure it's going to pop quite as dramatically. Now, when it's up close, yeah, but these types of things, and this is why like college football with like 12 different uniforms for 12 games in a season, so many of them just are forgettable and downright bad. Um,
I think
I
David
but
liked the B because it still had the B on it, and that was the
I think
Baltimore thing last century when Angelos refused to call the Orioles
yeah,
Baltimore. By
and
the
I
way,
think that was
I met
smart.
Mr. Rubenstein the other night. By the way, so I have to. We'll talk about that later, but it's not. It was completely uneventful. But I think David didn't like the kiss face at that point. And at the end of the day, they said that the poll was the poll or whatever, and I will go by the poll was what they picked. But I think David was enamored with the B. David wanted to have a B on the helmet.
Yeah, and but just to finish my point, like think about a baseball cap, like the cartoon bird. It's front facing, it's the very front of the cap. You don't have that in football. It's a profile logo. So I think that's where the Kiss logo looks maybe a little awkward in that way, but it's fine for an alternate helmet. It's fine for an alternate look. Yeah, I don't think I'd want that to become the primary helmet. But we'll see what people say. I'm sure some people will love it and some people will hate it. And I find that so many of these uniforms, and we talked about this a decade plus ago with Randy Edsel when Maryland, when Under Armour became Maryland's, all of that, like they were going to become Oregon for the East Coast, right? With different uniforms and
Well,
all
they
that.
did storm the field and, get excited after
Oh,
beating
yeah,
USC. So they
yeah, yeah.
did, they did.
But with those kinds of things, young people have a much different opinion than older people like us, where we say, oh, I'm more of a purist. I like the classic look. Don't get rid of the original logo, the original uniforms, things of that nature. So we'll see. It's fine. I think it's a nice wrinkle rather than just doing the blackout multiple times, right? With the all black uniforms. So we'll see how it's provided. Yeah, the color rush uniforms. I I would say this, and anyone who's attended the games with the gold numbers, I do think it makes it a little more challenging to read the numbers in real time when you're just seeing the sideline TV angle, or if you're watching the game in person. But amongst those color rush, because that's not really a thing, that's not a league-wide initiative anymore. But when that was, what, 7, 8, 9 years ago, whenever they first introduced that, I thought the Ravens had better color rush uniforms than a lot of teams out there. So they're going to wear them with those with that jersey,
Will
that
Lamar have gold grills tonight, or is he going to just stay with the straight
I
ice?
don't
What are you going to
know.
do?
I mean, that's actually, I should have asked him that in the locker room the other day. But yeah, I think these guys are excited about it. It's something fun. It's a Thursday night game. People will either love it or it'll get panned. I'm sure the Ravens and the NFL were able to sell a boatload of merchandise with the what is it, the Purple Rising, is I think it's called, the Purple Rising helmet or whatever. So it's fine. Again, you look at what college football has become with uniforms and 6 different helmets and 18 different uniform combinations that you don't even get to every year. And we've seen the Ravens do this with some of their different pants and different combinations, but it's fine. And I am curious to see what it looks like. Again, watching them wear them on the practice field the last few days, or going back to last week, even, from afar, you don't really notice it that dramatically. So yeah, we'll see how it translates on TV. I think that's always the test, because that's how most people are going to watch it.
Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be up early, up late. We'll be around, but you get to sleep in this weekend. It's been a wild week with elections. We're going to have some conversation on that beginning next week. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare. Weird week, Thursday night football. Matte purple helmets, purple rising, and the Cincinnati Bengals in town. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.